Okay, welcome to episode 10. We are going to cover lists and accessing items in lists. We've already covered this, but if you need a quick refresher, we have a list here. We're assigning it to the variable x. We are going to print x, and we are going to print the element at index 0. So we will open our terminal, make sure we're in the right folder. We will run py10.py, not 120 yet. And we see that we get the value of the element at index 0, which is 1. Now, if you type, say you have a long list and you just need to get the last item, like the most recent entry maybe that you pushed on, something else, you can just use -1 here, and you see that it gets 3. And if we add another item, 4, save, run, we get the value of the last element 4. So that's sometimes pretty useful to do. You can also do a range of indexes, which, if you remember, is very similar to how we were doing it before. You would use the colon, and then you would put the index that you want to start with, which you will get the value of. So we will do 0, and then it stops at the index that's after the colon. So we're only getting 2 values back because 2 is this element with the value of 3. I don't want to confuse you by saying 2 is 3, but it's this element and it stops before that. So just remember that. And if we do something out of bounds, we still will get that returned. So it doesn't break the app, but you might be getting unwanted output if you just index up to like 1,000 or something, and then you modify this list later. You might be getting something you don't want. So just remember that it does that. If we do 0 to 1, we're only going to get the very first element. So keep that in mind. Now, if you leave out the start value, it will just start at 0. So we don't even need that. We can do 3, and you see that we get all of those values. We can also leave out the in value, and it will just run the whole list. So we can start at element 1 and just return all values in the list. The other thing we can do is do negative values. So we could do like a -4 and -1. So let's see what that does. I think maybe -2, just because our list is not very long. And you see that we get 3. So remember, it's stopping at the last element. So the -1 is saying all the way to the last element, but it won't return the last element when you do it this way. Remember. So if you do it that way, it'll run the whole list, if that makes sense. You can also see if an item exists in a list. So we'll just comment this out really quick, and this is going to be that conditional, kind of like we covered before. We'll just use an if statement. So we can say if, and then we'll just manually type this out, 1 in x. Then we can say print I found 1. Right, and then we can run that, and then it returns that. And if we do something like 5, right, we won't get any output. Remember, and then we can do like the else, print and then we're getting that else statement. So just remember how conditionals work. And we'll move on to the next thing. Okay, we're also able to change the value of an item in a list. Like we said, you can change them, add or delete. That's one of the perks of list. So we could do something where we just select an element. We'll just select the first element here. So we're going to select index 0, and we'll just change it to Bob. And then you can see if we print, we have changed 1 to the string Bob. We can change a range of item values as well. So just like we were printing a range, you could do something like this and change them all, and you could enter them. So we could do, we'll change it again from Bob to like red. And we want to actually, with multiple values, you want to replace it with another list. And blue. We'll do that. And not space blue, just blue. And then you see we run it, and it changes from element 0, and it stops at element 2, so it doesn't touch 3, and it changes it to red, blue. So we have red, blue, 3, and 4 now. Excuse me. If you insert more items than you replace, the new items will be inserted where you specified, and the remaining items will move accordingly. So if we start at, like, say, element 3 here, or even 2, and we just go through 3, or we can even leave that blank. We'll do hello and world, just so we can tell that they're changing. Do that and save and print. And you see that it just added all of those items in. So it overrode 3, 4, and then it added high and earth to the end of the list. We can also change all of these elements with just one item. So we'll just do this just so we see it very easily. And you'll see that we replaced all of those items with just one string. So got rid of everything else in the list and just put new, and that's just because we skipped 1. By starting at index 1, we skipped 1. So if we don't do that, we just do like this so that we have the range, then you see that it replaces everything with just that letter, or that string, sorry. And then you can insert also. So this is a list function, and it's insert. Did I type insert? I did. Okay. And then you will select the index. So say index 3, we want to insert 3 or 4, I guess. So we do that, and then you can insert it. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, and the reason we have that is because we changed back to using this list, so it defaulted. And then you can see it just added it because there was already an element there. So we inserted 4, so maybe this will be better. Let me say something that's different so you can see. So you see it actually pushed the value 4 back and inserted our element at the index of 3 where we wanted it. So it took this and put it here at index 3, and then it made index or element 4 at index 3 and pushed it to index 4. So hopefully that's not too confusing, but that's how you can insert items into a list. You can also append items, so you will hear the terms append or prepend. So either at the end or the beginning of a list or an array. That's a pretty common thing in programming. So to do that, it's just another function here. So we'll just type append, and then all we need to do is say appended, enter the item that we want to append, run it, and you see that it added that to the end of the list. So every time that we're running the code, it's resetting the variable of x, just so you know. It's not deleting appended, it's just resetting what x is to this. So if any of that's confusing to you, that's what's happening. We can also, as we said, you can insert, you can extend a list. So I'll just show you kind of what we can do. So say we have 2 lists. We'll just set y, we'll build another list here. Jeez, if I could type 5. So we have another list here, and we want to extend. So first of all, extend, and we can actually take the variable of y here and just plug it in, and then save, print. And you see that we added 5, 6, and 7 onto the end. It just appended all of the values starting at the beginning and went through them. You can also add any iterable item. For example, a tuple, a set, or a dictionary. Those are iterable. So if this was a tuple instead, so we can do y, delete that. We can say tuple 1, tuple 2. And then you see that it still extends based off the tuple. So it can do, like I said, tuples, sets, or dictionaries as well. Okay, now we'll talk about removing specified items. So another function that's built in is the remove. So we have x, which is our list, dot remove. And it's a function, so we need the parentheses. And then we want to remove 2. We just don't like 2. So we're going to get rid of 2. And you see that we have 1, 3, and 4. So it knew to just remove the specific value, and it found it. You can also remove a specified index. So if we wanted to access 2 and remove it by index, we could use the pop method. So do this with parentheses, and we can just put in index 1, because again we don't like 2, and just to show you that it is working and that it is refreshing the list, you can see we popped 3 out. So pop is one that I use a lot. If you do not specify index, pop just removes 1 from the end. So if we just leave it like this, you'll see it just gets rid of 4. There's also the delete keyword. So I don't personally use this one that I can think of, but you certainly could. So you see we got rid of 2 again by using the delete keyword, which is just del, not the full word. We can clear the list, so we could do x.clear, and that doesn't take any arguments. And now we just get an empty list. So if for whatever reason you need to sanitize an entire list, you can do it that way. Okay, I know this video is getting fairly lengthy, but hang in there or pause it if you need a break. We're going to cover looping through lists now, and we're going to use a for loop. So we'll type the word for to loop. We'll name our desired variable, which we'll just do num, since I'm naming the strings after numbers. And then we will say in, and we will choose x, which is the variable that we're going to loop through, which is a list. Then we enter, tab, and we want it to just print num. We come down here, execute, and it loops through it. So at first it prints the value at element, or the value of element 1, which is at index 0. Then it goes to index 1, index 2, index 3, and prints those values. So we can also do it where we loop through the index of numbers. And to do that, we would do for num in range here. And this is a function, and we are going to do length of x. So we're calling a function, we're passing in another function, which we're passing in list2 as an argument. And then here we need our colon, and then we're just telling it to print. And here we want it to print this list of I, or num, sorry. And that's just this variable. So that's the index, and we can actually even change that to I, because that makes more sense for index. And you'll see I a lot. So for index in range of the length, right? So we're setting, if you remember, range takes a value, and we're asking, what is the length of this list? So no matter what the length is, this is good code. Because if you just type in 3 or 4 and then you start appending stuff to the list, it's not going to do everything in the list. It's just going to do whatever static value you set here. But by doing length of x, that is a dynamic value that changes as we add things, and I'll show you that really quick. So again, we're printing it that way, and then if we add 5, right, it doesn't mess it up. right? But if we just do 3 here, then you see we only get 1, 2, 3, or if we did 4 because we had 4 elements before, you know, or even if we set 5, so we're getting them all, and then you were to append and add 6 here, now you're not getting 6. So that is why the length of x is a good way to do it, because you see now we get 6 even though we added 1. Okay, now we're going to use our first while loop. So there's for loops and there's while loops, and so we have our list. We're going to take, we'll just use I for the index, and we'll set that to 0, right, so that we start at the beginning of this list, and then we're going to say while I is less than the length of x, and then we need our colon so that we execute this loop, and then we're going to come down here and we want to print x of I. And then if you just were to run this, it would just run indefinitely. And the reason is because I is 0. So as long as this list, right, which the length of this list is 6, is bigger than I, this will just keep running. So we need to make sure that we increment the value of I on each pass. So what we will do is we will set I, and you can do this 2 ways. You can do plus equals, or you can just do equals I plus 1. So we're just incrementing by 1. And the reason that we want to do 1 is because we want every value to print, right? And so here we're just telling it to print x, we're calling this variable, and we're specifically asking for the index of whatever the value of I is. So the first loop, we will print x0, right? We'll take this 0, plug it in. Then the 0 comes down here, and it equals 0 plus 1. So now it equals 1. So while 1 is less than 6, it will run another pass. It will print x, and I is now 1, and it will print 1. And then it will take 1, it will add 1 to 1, so now we have 2. 2 is less than 6, it will print x of 2, and it will take it and increment it to 3. So that's how a while loop works. If you're ever running into a problem where you get into an infinite loop, if you hit Control X, that usually stops it. You can also just terminate programs, and computers and Chrome and stuff will also terminate programs a lot that are just running nonstop. You can run into a problem, and you certainly do not want an unending while loop to break your code. So just be cognizant of that, and let's demonstrate. So as you can see, it looped over it. The first pass it printed 1, then 2, and so on. So it's looping through the entire thing. While loops are another thing that are very useful, especially in data structures and algorithms, when you want a specific amount of loops through something. And a for loop is more common, I think. In my experience, I use for loops more often, but while loops are very crucial for very certain tasks. Now, Python has a thing called list comprehension, and basically what it is it's a shortest syntax for looping through a list. So it's a shorthand for loop, and it will print all the items in the list. So basically here, what we will do is square brackets, and we will say print x, or print num, for num in x, right? So here we're just telling it to print whatever value it is for each number in this list x. And I know the syntax looks very odd because it is odd, but this is called list comprehension. So we'll just comment that for your notes, and we'll go over all of these loops, so don't stress over it. And you don't have to use these shiny loops just to make your code as small as possible. Honestly, the more readable code is, probably the better, especially while you're starting out, because if you have to go back and read something, you want to understand it as quickly as possible. And if somebody doesn't know what a list comprehension is and you have them all in your code, it's going to complicate their ability to understand what you're doing.